and welcome to Capital H, listeners. In today's episode, we're going to focus on candidate experience. This is David Mallon, your host, chief analyst and lead of our Insights to Action practice at Deloitte Human Capital. And today, whether you have something to do with hiring or talent acquisition in your organization or not, at some point, you've likely been a candidate or you've hired someone. So you likely have your own perspectives on what it means to be a candidate, what the experience of a candidate should be. In simple terms, imagine the journey a candidate takes when they apply for, interview, hopefully join your organization. The experience of that journey, it impacts your brand, your reputation. It influences your ability to attract talent and can even affect your bottom line. There's evidence that candidates who have positive experiences, even if they don't get the job, they're more likely to apply again or recommend your company to others or even become loyal customers. And that experience isn't static. It's continuously evolving, driven by advances in technology, changes in candidate expectations, and of course, relentless competition in the market. Companies today are leveraging all sorts of innovative tools, many using AI. Of course, we couldn't go too long without using those words, to improve interviews, personalize outreach, and create immersive experiences that create impactful memories for candidates. Joining me today to talk about all of this is Cliff Jurkiewicz. He is Vice President of Global Strategy at Phenom. They're a leading provider in the talent experience, talent intelligence space. Cliff himself is a recognized thought leader and futurist in HR tech, and he's got a deep focus on the role of AI, automation, and personalization in talent experiences. He brings more than 2 decades of experience across marketing, operations, and product strategy. He has a unique lens on how companies can transform the way they attract, engage, and hire people. In this episode, we're going to dig into Phenom's State of Candidate Experience Report for 2025. We'll talk about what's working, what's not, and what talent acquisition leaders need to know to stay ahead of those changing expectations. So Cliff, welcome. Thanks so much for coming. Maybe start by just introducing yourself, telling us a bit about your background and your role at Phenom.
Sure. Thanks for having me, David, on Capital H. I'm an avid listener, so to be a first-time guest, I'm pretty excited about this. But my background is a little bit diverse. I actually started as a touring musician. I toured for 12 years as a drummer in a metal band in the late 80s through the 90s after coming out of music school. And it was there that I really got my first introduction to the shift in technology as we looked at moving from analog instruments to digital instruments and MIDI and some other things where it was, artificial intelligence was replicating to an extent what musicians were producing. And that got me very, very interested in where this was going. And so fast forward a number of years, I owned a software company and came to Phenom essentially as a startup. I'm employee 21 here of now almost 2,000 employees around the world that work for Phenom. And what brought me to it is really 2 things. The mission, number one, to help 1 billion people find the right work. And what a bold mission, and something that I think where I was at in my life from a career standpoint, wanted to be able to contribute meaningfully to the world and thought, what a great way, helping people find work seemed like a pretty awesome mission. So something we're pretty serious about, and really is the only value that Phenom has is in that mission. But we do that through artificial intelligence and machine learning and the Phenom Intelligent Talent Experience Platform. And essentially what we do and why I'm here is to bring a consumer-like experience using artificial intelligence, automation, and personalization to recruiting and retention to that ecosystem. So finding a job, retaining a job. If you're a recruiter, how do you find and source and attract and engage people to that work? But from the candidate experience standpoint, it really was the first mission of Phenom. Our whole thesis as a company was, how come finding a job can't be like shopping on Amazon, which was highly personalized, highly engaging, a lot of automation that you didn't see. You just were able to find what you wanted and you order it, and a couple days later it showed up on your doorstep. Super simple. And so we looked at that broken process and said, what can we do to make this better? And that's where we started. And it's the reason that we produce the Candidate Experience Report now in its 9th year.
It's 9th year. So I'm a researcher at heart, so I'm obviously going to want to poke on the research a bit. So you've been doing it for 9 years. Maybe give a sense of what is this research, what is its purpose in the context of that larger sort of mission?
I think the first thing is just understanding that there are several personas in the talent lifecycle or ecosystem, right? You have candidates, employees, recruiters, managers, and then leaders of companies. And we feel like with respect to what we're talking about today, the candidate experience, the candidate, the person looking from the outside into your organization and may not know much about you, what is that experience really like? How are you as an enterprise engaging them and helping tell your story, represent your brand, your values, your mission in the work that you're presenting to the market? How are you presenting that to the world and interacting and then engaging for them? And so it kind of exposes a shifting expectation. This conversation, I've been with Phenom now 9 years. So my first year here was the first year we came out with this report. And we had to, practically speaking, beg people to talk about candidate experience. Because you had job boards, you had HCMs and ATSs that had job listings and basic job keyword search. And they said, well, why would we need anything else? And we had to explain our existence. Like, why was this purpose and this objective of bringing a consumer-like experience so important? And now the question really becomes, why aren't you doing it? We can point that out and say that this is what candidates want. This is what it all boils down to. You need to meet candidates where they are, and you need to do it through several different vehicles or methods. Just having even a personalized career site is not enough. Having slapping on a conversational chatbot onto your existing job search is not enough, right? There are several different ways that you should offer as engagement so that the candidate can choose the path that they want that works best for them. But you need to be able to tell your story in every one of those ways. So for us, the candidate experience report, how we got here is kind of looking at that different layers and different levels of how people are engaging with technology to benefit candidates and ultimately benefit recruiters, because recruiters benefit because they get more data, more intelligence, and they understand, and this is the most important thing I can say about automation and intelligence, they understand the intention of the candidate. And that intention data is the most valuable because it's not always what someone is applying for. That just may be what you have available. And sometimes, and what we're seeing in the marketplace right now is a very, very big shift, moving away from, it's probably a bigger conversation, but moving away from job descriptions, right, and looking at skills makeup and skills patterns to say, what kind of work could we create for you in our enterprise? So the purpose of the State of Candidate Experience Report is to measure the effectiveness of your brand in the marketplace as candidates would see it.
What you're getting at is that, and this is, I think, leading into my next question, that this has really always been about the larger relationship that you have or potentially could have with that candidate, almost sort of separate from any particular job that they might be interested in. And so because you're interested in this sort of wider relationship, that gets to the question, I think what you've probably had to do and why no one was paying attention to you when you first got started is that companies recognized, oh, we hire people and there's a process for onboarding them. And there's a process for making sure that we can for advertising the roles we want to hire and for kind of doing that back and forth, sharing information at the start just to sort of to source and to find candidates. So they understood this as a set of discrete moments, but they weren't thinking about it in the context. Yeah, but those moments are all part of a broader relationship. That's my way of leading into how do you define the candidate experience? Because I'm sure you probably did do that to, again, make the case for why you should look at all of these things as a unified whole.
Such a great question. And it's one every organization should be asking themselves. And I will start with this. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of my recruiting organization? And if the answer is to hire people, then you are missing a key driver of what can create a much better recruiting experience for candidates. And so my answer to that question, and the leaders that I work with in this space who are, I would say, aren't even progressive anymore. They're doing what should be the table stakes. But what they say is our recruiting organization is about delivering the greatest candidate experience that represents our brands and values. Because 96 or 97% on average of the individuals that are looking for work, might apply for a job, are not going to get the job, because most organizations don't have enough jobs available for everyone that applies, right? So to your point, as you opened us up, you should be building these experiences knowing that most people won't get the job. And that changes your lens as to how you build these experiences. And you start to think about, this isn't about passive apply and wait. It's more of a two-way dialogue. You're having a conversation, sometimes direct, sometimes indirect, But that conversation is the most important thing. And you wouldn't have a conversation with a friend or a loved one or a colleague at work in 30-second or 10-second chunks. You walk by someone and say, "Hi, good morning." And then maybe later you go by, "How's your day going?" Then later on you say, "Oh, my kids are fine." Like, no one would do that. But that's what we do to candidates today. We give them a little bit and then we expect them to wait, and give them a little bit more, we expect them to wait more. That is not something that's what I would call real-time transparency, which is required at every stage. And certainly the other really big piece is that personalized guidance, being able to coach, give next steps and nudges, tailor the content towards the individual versus, towards the generalized. And this is where, when I say table stakes, AI and automation are the foundation of that. It's not the focus. The candidate experience is the focus. Delivering on your brand is the focus. You're just doing it through tools that are helping you understand the intention of that candidate and keeping them engaged at every single step, even knowing the likely outcome is going to be, hey, not today, right? But maybe we've got something for you in the future.
Well, especially today where most roles going to get thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of responses, and candidates are, especially with their own AI tools, applying for not 2 or 3 jobs, but hundreds of jobs. If nothing else, the volume of the market makes it such that it's kind of hard to be recognized. It's sort of hard to actually create something that you might describe as a relationship, especially with the far larger percentage that, like you said, the answer is going to be maybe not now or not today. Let's dig into the research. So this year's report, it just sort of summarized for us, like, what are some of the key findings for this year? What key messages, things that you thought were surprising or maybe not so?
What's surprising to me, and has been really since we started this report, is that 88% don't suggest job-related openings. So the career sites don't, or the experience doesn't suggest, related job openings. They show them a job and someone applies that or don't, they leave, but they don't really get the suggestion. But even bigger than that is 87% are failing to use AI and automation to personalize the career site, which is your main vehicle. And now we have job boards, and job boards are sometimes a very good entryway into your career site. Go to job board, do a search on one of the big job boards, and it'll point back to your career site. But they get there and they wind up, literally they start over. But there's no personalization in there. So 87% of current career sites don't use personalization, which is crazy in a world where personalization is everywhere. The other thing I think was really important is, and this addresses the black hole that we put candidates into. 48% of candidates still wait over a week to get their first update. That silence just completely obliterates any engagement that you had at the beginning of that week, which is just, it's almost inexcusable in today's consumer market. So those are some of the downsides. I can talk about some of the upside if you'd like.
By all means.
I think the AI quality gap is closing, even though 87% of those sites don't use AI and automation. Those that are using it are closing a gap pretty significantly. So using a conversational chatbot, for example, creates significantly less drop-off rates than using a standard, like more logic-based chatbot. So conversational AI, in that sense, to keep engagement, is driving abandon rates down, which is really good. So the type of even chatbot that you use becomes really important. So that's just one. We are seeing a 96% approval rate on how well job descriptions are being written and describing the skills and competencies and other details. And that's a big driver. That's up significantly than 9 years ago, where that percentage was below, I believe it was below 50%. And so I think enterprises are paying attention to at least some of the information they're putting out there and making it more consumable. The other thing we're seeing with job descriptions that's not necessarily in the report, but I see it on a day-to-day basis, is actually job descriptions are getting smaller, right? They're becoming more focused so that people can understand how well they fit into a job just by reading that job description. And the other thing I think is really good is 91% of the Fortune 500 provide the ability to upload a resume and cover letter from mobile devices. Now, I laugh a little bit because it's 2025 and you'd think everything is just mobile, but so many parts of the candidate experience that are just now starting to catch up with that. And we're happy to see that the importance of the mobile upload so that they can begin to personalize, or at least that information can be parsed and used throughout the process, and you don't have to repeat yourself or repetitive typing of the same info, is really positive. So I think, there's some really good things that are going on at the, I'd say, tactical level, but at the strategy level, like an overall personalized strategy, AI strategy around candidate experience, I think we still have a lot of opportunity there.
There's a couple things you said I want to go a little deeper on. And to start with is at that strategy level. So going back to this notion of that most are not even just simply recommending other opportunities that might be a fit. Obviously, innovation or lack thereof, I suppose, isn't just happening in the world of candidate experience and talent acquisition. We have, and for a long time, have had the same things happening in, call it workforce planning, in just taking a skills-based approach to talent in general. And some of these other things feel like they are foundations or sort of the building blocks. Like you're not going to hire, unless you're a major company who's used to, for your college graduate hiring, your fresher kind of hiring, that's for most, that's the only place where historically they may have hired for, call it more potential, we're not hiring for a job, we're hiring a particular kind of talent that we're going to then route into, a number of different potential career paths over their time with us. There's a lot of examples and always have been of that. But beyond those examples, trying to see hiring as hiring for talent on potential versus hiring for what the finance function has told us is our order board this year, and we need 2 headcount of this type and 2 headcount of that type. Like that's the mindset that it feels to me that most organizations, executives, all the way down to hiring managers and recruiters are sort of trapped into, which is why it's probably hard for them to see how they would want to suggest another job. But kind of relates to even the other thing you raised related to sort of silence. I'm with you in that it kind of seems, well, even if that was true, even if you don't necessarily know that you have other roles specifically that you're hiring for right now, it's not hard to at least even make that connection and demonstrate that, to some degree, demonstrate just the candidate that you've seen them. That even if it's through AI and automation, that you still have just a slightly better understanding of who they are, so that you can say, we're not just crossing you off the list. We actually recognize that you've got some skills, and hey, there's this thing over here that looks a little bit more like you, or even just use that as a way to calibrate, did we get the first assessment right? Anyway, there's a question wrapped in all of that, which is that how much do you get that sense from the companies that you work from, that it's not just that they don't know to do this, it's that it's hard to fit that into how they approach talent and defining talent and managing it and growing it and so and the like.
So David, the question that you're asking is fairly deep, because it really focuses on a bit of culture, a lot of culture of these organizations. And I would say the individuals and even the leaders have very strong desires to be able to transform their organizations, to look at that level of intelligence, to understand intention, to understand what someone might be able to grow into and how they might even be able to change the organization. The problem really is, and has been for at least the last 10 to 15 years, is the core systems that they're using are handcuffing them, because those systems are legacy architecture and they could not deliver on that promise because the technology that they're forced to use doesn't allow them the capability to do what we're talking about. And I want to be very, very clear. This isn't about Phenom. This is a space we sit in. We sit in the space with some wonderful competitors, and we actually talk quite a bit about the domain and where we're all going and how we're trying to transform it as a whole from an HR tech standpoint. But if you look at HCMs as an example, and I'm not picking on HCMs to pick on them, this is something that I think is worth talking about. Why does an HCM exist? Like, what was its original purpose? And the original purpose of an HCM was, in the very first HCM, was built off of a supply chain system. This is going back about 40 years. The person that sort of came up with this, his name was Louis Tattoo, and yes, that's his real name. And he said, well, why can't we move people through a process the same way we move a box of product? And that was really a genius idea back then because nobody was even thinking that way. And it's been such an enormous benefit to our domain and to the human resources ecosystem in general. And it's worked really well up till the point where personalization in the internet experience became the game changer in e-commerce. And once that happened, within a matter of months, you can look at an HCM and an ATS and say, people aren't products, and why are you treating them that way, right? So people want to be personalized. So if you're working in ecosystem, and this is often what I challenge leaders to look at, I said, if you've got a bullseye with a bunch of concentric rings, and at the center of that bullseye, and this bullseye chart is your technology ecosystem, you're mapping it out. But if at the center of that chart is your HCM, you're missing the point. The center of that chart should be technologies that use personalization and automation to deliver experience for everyone in the ecosystem. And we were talking about candidates today, but for everyone. And when you do that, it doesn't mean that HCMs aren't needed, right? So they just sort of go maybe to the second concentric ring, just outside. They're not the total focus, but they're an important part of the process because business is complicated. They need systems that they can configure to meet the business operation. But delivering experience and engagement is a different requirement. And these legacy systems, their literal architecture was not designed to do this. And so that's where leaders need to think a little bit differently about that's why I go back to purpose, right? What is your purpose as a recruiting organization? It should be to deliver the very best candidate experience that supports your brand and values. And if you believe that, then it intentionally moves your HCM and your ATS just outside that bullseye, and you got to start thinking about what you put at the center to deliver on that promise.
So we've done quite a bit on just the move towards being skills-based, for example. That's one aspect of what you're talking about for a while now, and have recognized that I think what you're getting at is that the philosophy that's embedded behind why you would do that is often very quickly running up against the challenges of just job architectures and putting people into categories. And those categories are still useful to the degree to which you're connecting these systems and these processes to other systems and processes. But to get to what you're saying, like who's in the center of that circle, you want to know a whole lot more about the candidate. You want to have a more nuanced understanding and story around these people. As you put it, people are not products. And so you're going to end up collecting a whole lot more data and do a lot more useful and compelling and interesting things with that data than simply connecting them to the supply chain. Yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. So actually, maybe that leads to, in this year's research, you've been doing this for 9 years, do you see trends in how, for example, the recognition that we should be closing the silence gap, or we should be trying to see the candidate and as more than just they fit into one box, we see them in a more nuanced way and suggest other opportunities? Are there trends in shaping the candidate experience in 2025 that are different than 9 years ago, and can tell us a little bit where this is going into the future?
Yeah, I'm very happy to report that our friends in the large, enterprise HCMs and ATSs are paying attention, and we're starting to see some significant changes in that, where they're starting to bring personalization and automation to a greater degree. And how do I know that? I mean, number one, it's my job to know it. So, I talk to, and we even partner with some of them because we should be good partners in the delivery of these experiences. But I'll say just pragmatically, go back 2 years ago and look at the marketing campaigns of the larger players, and you won't see AI and automation and personalization mentioned at all. And that I can guarantee you. Now you look at it, and it's in all their marketing.
It's in their marketing, but it's in their products.
Well, I was just going to say that. I think there is a serious desire, and I think there's a couple out there that are actually doing a very good job of starting to deliver on, and I'm going to say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, if that's okay, because they're all friends of mine, and we're all serving the same audience, but I think they're starting to get what we got 10 years ago. The good news for candidates is it's not hard to accelerate the innovation inside these systems if you are focused on it. There's some significant changes that need to be made architecturally for the bigger enterprise systems. And again, we're starting to see that. But the fact that they're even talking about it, even in their marketing, now they got to deliver on the promise. And ultimately, the consumer, the customer, the enterprise they're selling their software to will determine if they've met that challenge. But this is something that we did not hear 2 years ago. And now it's plastered everywhere. And we're really happy that is now a standard conversation. Like, what are you doing to address the candidate experience is something that recruiting teams and the enterprise software companies are talking about every single day. And so that is great. But yeah, I think it remains to be seen as to how they deliver that. I do think, on a side note, this is one of the reasons why you're going to see very significant activity in the mergers and acquisitions market over the next year or so, because the fastest way to turn on new technology is just acquire it. And that's a good thing. That's advancing the domain's purpose on a number of fronts.
Are the candidates' expectations themselves shifting here? We have that consumer experience we've come to know and love for all those other apps that we use. But are candidates saying out loud that's what they want from this process, or in more explicit terms versus just indicating to us that they're not as loyal or as happy as they could be?
I think candidates are more vocal now than they've ever been. And I think part of it is because, again, I'll go back to what I just said in the previous conversation. I think the bigger players are finally really listening to candidates, and they're giving candidates an opportunity to voice their needs, their desires, their wants, and they're listening. Now, whether they can deliver on is another story, but that's fine. Those kinds of things take a little bit of time, but they are listening. Us in this domain who are a little bit more innovative, Phenom and the group that we're associated with, our competitors, have obviously been listening for a long time. So we've got lots of data and experience there. I think the expectations are evolving pretty quickly. Candidates absolutely expect instant and tailored feedback, and that's a non-negotiable, right? And the challenge that we're still seeing, and it's in our report, is 62% of employers still delivered very generic status updates if they deliver anything at all. And why is this important? And of the entire candidate experience, once someone has expressed an interest in a job, whether they've just held their hand up like I've joined a talent community or I have applied for a job, they're telling you something. That's a huge signal. In that moment, you have an opportunity to support your brand because you've got them engaged. Essentially, if you were a door-to-door salesperson and you knocked on someone's door and they opened it up, right, and they said, hey, I'm willing to listen to you, right? And that's what an application is. An application is I'm throwing my hand up if you're willing to talk to me. It's a captive audience. That status update, hey, we've received your application. Here's a little bit about the team that runs that organization. Here's the leader. Here's a little bit more about our company. Here's about our culture. Here's what we know about you because you applied and how you might fit in. It's a little bit of a hook, but in a great way, like you're pulling them in. I would equate this a little bit to product marketing. And really, and again, people aren't products, but what product marketers will tell you is people buy on emotion. And people get engaged and stay connected on emotion, how you make them feel. And if you have something that's even remotely personalized, it pulled a little tidbit about them in that next update. I applied, hey, thanks for applying. Here's a little something we learned about you. Here's a little more about us. That's a great hook. And they're like, oh, well, awesome. And maybe give them a next step. You will hear from us in the next, 36 to 48 hours with what a potential next step might be. So that's such a great opportunity. And if you're delivering a generic update, hey, we got your application, thanks. That is terrible. I would rather you did nothing. I'd rather you did nothing than send that update.
Okay, so the connection to product marketing is interesting because, and while, yes, so candidates aren't products, people aren't products, but candidates are consumers in the context of they're buying you as an organization. And so I think the connection, it makes absolute sense that we would bring some of the perspectives, the methodologies, the technologies, the data that we use to get the consumer to buy, to play to emotion, to reach that kind of connection with our candidates. That makes absolute sense. And I hear in all the things you just described, I hear lots of moments where there is intelligence to be gathered. There's data to be captured. So maybe give us a little bit of sense of how companies then use data to understand that journey, to make decisions, to close that expectation gap, and so forth.
So I want to address a little bit of the, when you're talking about, especially brand support, when you have the opportunity to tell your story to a candidate, and again, maybe extract a little bit more data, from them, so you're understanding, again, intention and personalizing those communications. But an interesting stat that we have in the report is for every 10% bump in drop-off drags down the employer brand score by 7 points. And that is huge. And the negative reviews spike like crazy when candidates feel ghosted. So those are two opportunities. The reverse of that is amazing. It's exponentially positive when you give a little bit of personalization. What happens to the rest of that experience? It changes the entire dynamic, changes how they feel, right? It gives them a sense of being inclusive and having an equal chance at opportunity, which I think is something that we all agree is something that we would want. So from that perspective, I think looking at it and saying, telling your story and sort of mapping out the entire process of hiring an individual into your organization and looking at each of those moments and saying, here's the brand story we can tell here, and here's the data that we're going to get from that individual. And then maybe we ask for something else, like tell us more about X. And it could be, what worked on the career site and what didn't. Or looking at, if you've got a conversational chatbot, that is, what used to be unstructured data, which was like text messages between the recruiter and the candidate that were not tracked in any way, shape, or form because they didn't have a system to do it. Now you've got a conversational chatbot that you can look at that and you might be able to extract from that some nuanced piece, like maybe somebody talked about their dog, for example. And we see this in some of the clients that we have that focus on the pet community. And somebody might talk about the name of their dog. You put that name in an email and, by the way, here's a coupon for, little Charlie to get a toy at our local store. I think you were sort of hitting on it a little bit that your candidates are consumers, but you can take that one step further and say, you are a part of our community. Whether you get a job here or not is going to depend on any number of things, what you want, what we want, and we will agree or not on that. But we value you as a human being. We want to show you that. And at the same time, we want you to have the agency over this experience. And when people feel that they have agency over the experience, they will stay engaged every single time, even knowing that the likelihood of getting that job in this case is probably low, but they'll stay engaged. And if they don't get the job and you follow up with, hey, not this time, but here's a number of things we learned about you, and we're going to keep our eye, and we're going to keep you engaged. And maybe they get an email every 2 weeks or once every 30 days. Hey, we're still looking, or hey, we found something. Why don't you come back and let's have a conversation? And that re-engagement's really important. So I'm hoping that this resonates with the audience, that at every moment, look for something small that is meaningful and that personalizes that experience. And you are going to build that story for the individual based on those moments.
I think it will. Just to restate a bit of what you've just said, practically behind the scenes, you're talking about that we've captured data and we're using AI and other sorts of tools to infer, to create inferences that we can then make choices about. We can choose to do more. We could choose to send them that follow-up, what have you. But to them, to the candidate, it's like you've seen them. You recognize a bit more of them beyond just the data they put into their resume or what have you, and that you have demonstrated a commitment to keep an open relationship, to check in, to ultimately build something that is a bit more compelling than they've just applied for a job. So I think all of us, like I said off the top, have had the experience of being a candidate and had the experience of, many of us have had the experience of hiring candidates, and we sort of know implicitly when it doesn't just, at the end of the day, to use a word, feel human. And this seems a reasonably kind of common sense way to kind of create that human connection. So I'm going to start to wrap us up here. Before I do, though, I think there's an interesting thing. You referenced in a few places where we have this data, but we can also look to the world around us, third parties and what have you, to sort of see how this shows up, whether that's in sort of social media or otherwise. How are companies using the data that they collect from platforms like yours and others to benchmark themselves against others, to sort of figure out where they are in this, sort of the broader things they're trying to accomplish?
The thing I do like about the State of Candidate Experience Report is it's become the standard that I think our domain and leaders in our domain look at and say, how are we doing, right? So it's gained a lot of credibility in the market because it's done in a very unbiased way. And we provide all the methods by which we evaluate and how do we analyze and come up with the rankings. Some folks really love it. I think there's a minority of people who were shining a light on their pain points. But I think overall, what this is telling us is we can actually measure this. And I think that's the important part of why the State of Candidate Experience Report is so trusted now, is because it allows us to firm foundation based on science and data to be able to do that. So how are clients using that data and using other data that we've sort of mentioned today? Those, I can speak for our clients for sure and say the goal has shifted. One of the things that we talk about, and I interviewed one of our clients yesterday for a podcast that I do, and I asked a simple question, like, how has this technology, and we are one of, an important one, but we are one of the technologies that they use. There's 3 or 4 in their ecosystem, including their large HCM that they use. And so how these technologies change the conversation that you have with your recruiters. What are you guys talking about every day that you weren't talking about 5 years ago prior to having all these great technologies with AI and automation and personalization? And he said it best, and this is how they're using the data. They are thinking more strategically than they ever have before. They're thinking about, number one, how do they deliver on their culture into the marketplace when they're out there externalizing the work that doing job searches and people searches. They're thinking about, we have all these awesome tools to be able to tell a story that we weren't able to tell before. And the data says what that story should be, right, to each individual. So personalizing it to that level. The second thing is that they're able to understand where their business is going. And that's a very different conversation than 5 years ago for this particular client, but it's consistent with what we hear from other clients, is recruiters are now becoming strategic talent advisors to the business. And it's not just about somebody left or I have an open rec, go fill it for me. It is, I want to expand my business. I'm in a division in a company, right? I'm a leader. I've got X number of employees. We have this product or service we're delivering. We want to go beyond that. Tell us where the market is heading. Like, where can we take, with the talent we have or the talent that we can bring in, what new skills can come in, what new competencies, because that's going to create innovation. It brings new ideas. So they're looking at recruiters now as strategic talent advisors to help them grow and scale their business in directions that weren't possible before, because the data is leading them to those conclusions. And that data was not available before. So the last thing I'll say is, it's not just about any single data point. It's about the aggregate of the data and the story that it tells. You always had some level of data from, say, an ATS or an HCM. I think it was fairly anecdotal, it was transactional, and it was lagging, very, very lagging data. The difference that you have today, and I will say this to the credit of some of the ATSs and HCMs out there, along with Phenom and our awesome competitors in this space, much of it is real time now. And it's expanded. And I can give you the best example, talking about Phenom just for a moment. Our intelligence system has 800 data points that can be formulated in any number of ways, depending on your role in the company, what you're looking at. If you're a recruiter, a hiring manager, if you're the CFO, right? You can pull data out of the system that is able to very reliably predict, it'll certainly tell you where you are, but very reliably predict where you should be going. And it gives you directionally a really strong sense of direction that we didn't have even 5 years ago. And so that's how they're using it. It's so much more strategic in recruiting at this point than it's ever been. And I think it's changed the recruiting role and made the individual recruiter and those teams extraordinarily valuable to the organization in ways that nobody could have predicted.
It's pretty amazing given sort of the traditional roles that recruiters play in organizations. This notion of predictions, you've teed up nicely. The last question I'm going to ask you, give us a sense of if there was one thing that has you worried about this notion of candidate experience, in the broader marketplace, one thing that you're really optimistic about, this could be a trend, a technology, or what have you. And for both of those, what should our listeners, especially those that are talent acquisition leaders, doing to prepare?
This week and earlier this year, a couple times I've met with the Deputy Labor Secretary for some initiatives that around AI literacy that we're working on, met with congressional leaders on legislative efforts around artificial intelligence. And certainly, and the foremost thing that I would always lead any of those conversations is humans have to remain in control. These technologies should never be allowed to make end-to-end decisions, right? They'll make some minor decisions in the process with human oversight, but humans ultimately have to stay in control, and the regulatory process should allow for that. But my worry right now, especially in the United States, is that the lack of federal AI regulation means that we're going to have 50 states doing 50 different things. And ultimately, the consumer, the candidate, the individual is going to lose out because they're going to lose access to these technologies, which can give them great advantages, especially in looking for meaningful work. And so that's my big concern. The thing that I'm really optimistic about is agents. For your audience, they probably had started to hear about AI agents. And the big difference is, partly is how they operate with human direction. They can work autonomously. And that's really important because agents, just in the name alone, we talked earlier in this conversation about agency, right? An individual have an agency. Well, an agent can give the individual more agency inside this experience versus just being the human being trying to use the technologies. And so it's really a fusion of human intention and being able to action on that, with an agent to do some of the more repetitive and mundane things that we have to do in this ecosystem. So I made a pretty bold prediction that in the next 5 years, that those that are willing to really learn about the technologies, and anyone can learn about it. I don't care if you're a frontline worker as a cashier, you're stocking the store shelves, through a doctor, lawyer, or pilot. Everyone should have access to and should be using these technologies and can. But you will see a future now where you will develop a digital duplicate of yourself. And that'll be your own agent, your own persona in a digital format. And it will do all those silly little things that we don't find a lot of value in, like scheduling things and, maybe even doing some research and finding stuff, but doing it based on my personal wants and needs. So it really gets to know us, and that's a big difference. But you're going to be paired with that agent. And when you go to look for work, you will be hired for yourself as a human being and the human side of work that you can do, and bringing that agent along to do all of those mundane tasks in the background for you. And the human being will really be tasked with 3 core things: critical thinking, strategic planning, and communication. And that, because we can do that, and to this day and for the foreseeable future, we will do that better than AI can. But all those little things that we do every day will be done by AI, and we'll be paired, and that's what we'll be hired for. You will come with your agent to the new job, and you will be 400 to 800% more productive and effective and more satisfied and valued than you are just as an individual human being without those technologies. So I think we have a very, very bright future. And what I would tell people to do is, the first is immerse yourself in these technologies and learn them. There's plenty of tools out there, and be open to the idea of pairing with it to understand where your new value will be in this paradigm shift, right? I hate to use all those sort of weird marketing terms, but it's true, right? Work is going to change very, very significantly. And those that pair themselves with these technologies are going to be significantly advantaged. And it will equalize opportunity for everyone. And there's, the democratization of these tools is really important for us to recognize and participate. The only other thing that I would recommend, and it goes to the regulatory piece, which is my concern, is help us educate lawmakers. Do not expect them, and we should never have that as a standard, that they're going to know everything. They're human beings just like the rest of us, and some of them are learning as they go, but they are decision makers in how these tools will be regulated. And we want to make sure that the opportunity to use these tools is there for everyone and is judged fairly and certainly held to a very high ethical standard as well as a regulatory standard. But if we're not involved in the conversation, then we lose that opportunity to voice where we value these tools. And so get involved and pay attention to what's going on.
I love all of that. I love the notion that basically, listeners, we should all be going out to play. We should be playing with these things, using them to sort of expand our own horizons, our own imaginations, but we should also be trying to help those around us expand their imaginations as well. That'll do it for today. Cliff, this has been an eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and walking us through what's going on in the world of candidate experience. Thank you, listeners, for spending your time with us as well today. You can learn more about Phenom's candidate experience research on their website. And I think whether you're a recruiter or an HR leader or just an interested candidate, there's a lot to be taken away from this year's reports. Please do check it out. Of course, let us know what you think of Capital H. Rate us on whatever service you use to find us and look us up on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, and we hope you'll continue to join us as we explore future topics and trends that focus on making work better for humans and humans better at work. Until next time, stay curious. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, please go to deloitte.com/about.